Well, it's good to have you here with us across all 12 of our locations, and if you happen to be streaming live with us, then real glad that you are joining us as well. We're actually in a series of studies that we've entitled I Quit, and in this series, we're talking about the fact that God has designed you, He's designed me to live what we're calling remarkable lives, where He says the experience that we have in life really could be remarkable, and our tendency is to think if we're going to experience all that God has planned for us, then somehow we must need to do more things, when in reality, we may actually have to do less things. And there may be some things that we need to pull back and actually stop doing. And so I hope in this series that you'll be making some commitments of things that you're going to stop doing, not more things that you're going to begin doing. And today, I actually want to challenge us to make a commitment to stop and quit comparing. Stop comparing yourself with others. And I never thought that making a comparison or myself with others was an issue for me. And so I decided I was going to keep track one morning to see what all was going through my mind. And suddenly I realized, oh man, I need to quit making comparisons. Here's what I noticed. I pulled out of my driveway in the morning and I noticed all of my neighbors' lawns around me. And I kind of looked to the left, I looked to the right, I see Jay's lawn, and it looked greener and more manicured than mine, and so that kind of made me mad. But then I looked to the left, and I thought, well, mine's better than theirs, and more green, more trim than theirs, and so I kind of figured that evens out. I was doing okay in the lawn department. I get out of my neighborhood, and I'm enjoying the drive to the office until I pull up to the stoplight. When I pull up to the stoplight, I'm next to a car that was a whole lot cleaner, a whole lot newer than my car, and all of a sudden I started thinking, well, maybe my ride isn't as good as I thought it was on the way to church, and so I'm not enjoying it as much as I was until I saw the other guy's car. And then I look to my right and I look to my left as I'm driving to the office, and I pass several other churches, and I notice, well, our church building is bigger than theirs, and our parking lot is bigger than theirs. And all of a sudden, I noticed myself feeling kind of smug and even a little bit prideful, and because so many people are coming to LCBC, and I hadn't even been driving and away from the house, but just less than 20 minutes. And all of a sudden, it hit me, David, you're doing it. You're making comparisons right and left. And you and I have this tendency to look to our left and look to our right, and we do that in order to figure out, how am I doing? Am I doing okay? Am I measuring up? Am I doing the way I think I ought to be doing? And so what we tend to do is we look to other people to kind of compare ourselves to, and then we decide whether or not we're doing okay. And I actually like the way Andy Stanley talks about this whole idea of comparison. He talks about all of us living in what he calls the land of And he says all of us want to have an added to the adjectives to describe us. And let me kind of illustrate it to you this way. He says all of us want to be rich-er, and we want the added to whatever we're called. We want to be skinny-er, not just skinny, but skinny-er than somebody else. I want to be smart, but smart-er. It's not good enough just to be smart. I want to be smarter than others. I want to be tall, but I want to be taller than some people at least. Or I want to be pretty, but prettier, not just pretty. Not good enough to be happy, need to be happier than others. Or hip, but not even just hip. You need to be hipper than other people. And we just want, Andy says, to be or have added to whatever adjective describes us. And here's how it actually works. See, I want more than you, because if I have more than you, then I can feel better about myself, and I might like you, and I might like hanging out with you at the office or over coffee or over dinner, but when I go home, I want to be able to say, you know what, those are good people, and I enjoy them, but the good thing is I have more than whatever they happen to have, whether it's rich or skinny or smart. I just want a little bit more than you possibly have. And the thing is, it doesn't just stop with me. I don't just want more for me, and because when you start dating, not only do you want more for yourself, but you also want more for your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You want them to have more and I want her to be skinnier, I want him to be smarter or taller, and it doesn't just stop with us. We want those associated with us to have a little bit more as well, and then they become your spouse, and you still want your spouse to have more and the thing is, it's not even really about your spouse. It's about you and what you think other people are going to think about you. And then we have kids, and you see somebody else's kids and how they're doing at school, and you hear what everybody else's kids are reading or how advanced they are. They skipped the grade, or they're excelling in sports. And so you start comparing your kids to their kids, and then you start urging your kids on to have a little bit more They need more in their lives, and And again, it's not even about your kids. It's about you and just what you think people are going to think about you through your kids. And there's another group of people. This group of people, they actually do have more than others, but it's a different kind of And so we look at them, and we look and we say, oh yeah, they're heavier. And so they've got a little bit more of that than I do. I'm slow, but they're slower than me, or shorter than me, or all kinds of poorer than me. And you kind of look and you go, I'm nerdy, but they're a whole lot nerdier than I am. And all of a sudden we feel good about ourselves because this group of people, they've got more than we do in these particular areas. And we start feeling superior to other people. And we know we shouldn't feel that way, but we do because we say, you know what, they've just got a little bit more in those areas than I do. And it's just what we do. We look to the left, we look to the right, and we see people that either are better than us, and then we look to the left and right, and we find people that aren't quite as we think, as good as us, and we're somewhere in the middle, and we know it's sad to do that, but our tendency is to make comparisons. And there's one other group of people that I just need to mention. This is a group that isn't happy with at all. Isn't good enough. They don't want to be they want to be est. And so not even richer, but they want to be the richest. Not only smart, but they want to be the smartest. Not only happy, but they want to be the happiest. And they're not satisfied with healthier. They want to be the healthiest. And this is a group that just want to be in a category all by themselves. And when other people compare themselves to them, then they say, ooh, there's no way I can measure up to that because they're est. And again, we look to our left and our right and we try to find people that we can compare ourselves to just so that we can know how we're doing and kind of gauge how we think we're doing in life. But here's what you need to know about comparisons. Every time you start to look to the left, every time you start to look to the right, to compare yourself with the people around you, bottom line is there is no win when it comes to comparison. You don't win at all. There's no sense of satisfaction. There's no win. There's always going to be somebody that has more than you, and there's always going to be somebody with less, and so there's no win in comparison. And I'll even take it a step further. Not only is there no win in comparison, comparison actually is dangerous. It's not good for you. And it can be damaging to you. It can be damaging to your family. It's not good for your life. I think that's why a guy named Solomon actually said this. Solomon said, a peaceful heart leads to a healthy body. Jealousy is like a cancer in the bones. He says it'll destroy your life. It'll just eat at you. You begin to compare and you look at other people and it just begins to eat at you. And he says it's not good for you. Solomon lived 3,000 years ago. That was what he was talking about 3,000 years ago. And he did more than you and I will ever do. He accomplished more with his life than you and I will ever. He had more than you and I will ever have. Wealthiest person in his lifetime. Kings and queens would actually come. They would sit at his feet, listen to him for wisdom. And so you kind of say when Solomon speaks, I suppose we ought to listen. And so when Solomon says, you know what, it'll destroy you, I think he's being serious about that. Another time, he actually said this. He said, then I observed, so it's like he's been watching people. He said, then I observed that most people are motivated to success by the envy of their neighbors. They look at their neighbors and they say, you know what, they've got this, they've got that, I want that too. And Solomon says, you know what, I've been observing people. What I've noticed about people is they look to their left, they look to their right, and then they try to figure out what everybody else is doing. They try to figure out where everybody else is shopping, what everybody else is wearing, what they're listening to, what amount of money they're making in their jobs, what they drive, where do they live, and he says it's all about comparison. And he said people are driven by just kind of what's going on around them. And again, he made these observations 3,000 years ago, and we're still doing it today. And we look around and we base who we are or who we think we are on our comparisons of other people. And Solomon says this whole thing of looking to your left and right to kind of figure out who you are, he says, you know what, it's not a good thing. This is the full statement that he makes. He says, I observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors, but this too, he says, is meaningless. It's like chasing the wind. And if you've ever tried to chase the wind, you know you can't catch it. There's never a win in it. You're not ever going to win when it comes to comparisons. There's no finish line. There's never a sense of satisfaction, never a sense of peace, and it's dangerous because it can destroy you. It can destroy your family. It can destroy others. And when we look to our left and right to try to figure out our sense of worth and who we are, comparisons, one of the things that comparisons do is it begins to distort our thinking. As you begin to compare to yourself to others, as you begin to compare what you have to what others have, as you begin to compare, it actually begins to distort your thinking. And it's almost like the more you compare, the less you're able to even think straight. No longer are you happy with what you have. All of a sudden, you want what everybody else has. And you find yourself just kind of, your mind is playing tricks with you. And let me ask you to grab a Bible. Open it up to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 8. If you don't have a Bible with you, there's some of the seats around you. Page 216 in the Bibles and the seats around you. 1 Samuel chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8 actually tells us about a group of people, and they were a lot like us. They saw what other people had around them, and they wanted to be like everybody else. They wanted what everybody else had. And this group of people, they had never had a king before to lead them, to guide them. And they began to look to their left and right, and they noticed everybody around them had a king. And so they said, you know what? We want a king too. And so here's their comment, 1 Samuel chapter 8. Look at the last part of verse 5. They say, give us a king to judge us like all the other nations have. Give us a king. Everybody else has one. We want to have one like everybody else. We've looked around. We've made some comparisons. Everybody else has something we don't have. We want a king like everybody else. And having a king wasn't necessarily a good idea. God instructs a man named Samuel to talk to the people. He says, look, you need to tell them. Tell them what it's really like to have a king. It's not all that it's cracked up to be. It's not going to be such a good thing. God knew that. And so jump down to verse 9. God says, do as they ask, but solemnly warn them about the way a king will reign over them. So Samuel passed on the Lord's warning to the people who were asking for a king. This is how a king will reign over you, Samuel said. And then he goes on to this long list. This is what it's going to be like if you have a king. The king will draft your sons and assign them to his chariots and his charioteers, making them run before his chariots. Some will be generals and captains in his army. Some will be forced to plow in his fields and harvest his crops. Some will make his weapons and chariot equipment. The king will take your daughters from you and force them to cook and bake and make perfumes for him. He will take away the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his own officials. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your grape harvest and distribute among his officers and attendants. He will take your male and female slaves and demand the finest of your cattle and donkeys for his own. He will demand 1/10 of your flock, and you will be his slaves. When the day comes, you will beg for relief from this king that you are demanding. But then the Lord will not help you. And you look at this list and you go, oh my goodness, heavy taxes, a military draft, there's going to be slavery. Man, kings are not all they're cracked up to be. And that should have been enough to quench their thirst for a king, where they'd go, no, you know what, second thought, no thank you, I won't do that. But remember, comparison distorts your thinking. And so they're not seeing clearly, they're not hearing clearly. And so here's their response, verse 19. The people refused to listen to Samuel's warning. Even so, we still want a king, they said. We want to be like the nations around us. Our king will judge us and lead us into battle. And how could you think that? How could you say that? And yet their thinking is distorted because comparison distorts our thinking. And at some point, God listens to their thinking and their comments and their desires, and he hears enough, and so he gives them what they want, even though he knew it wasn't best for them. And so here's what happens, verse 21. Samuel repeated to the Lord what the people had said, and the Lord replied, do as they say, give them a king. Then Samuel agreed and sent the people home. Don't miss the fact that God hears their cry, their desire, maybe even their whining, and he comes to a point of saying, you know what, okay, I'll give you what you want, even though it's not best for them. We don't want to push God to the point where he goes, you know what, okay, it's not what's best for you, but if that's what you want, take it. And so I love going to Costco, Every time I go to Costco, I walk up and down every aisle. I start on the right side of Costco, and I work my way to the back of the building. And I start with the big screen TVs, and I compare their big, new, shiny TVs to my TV. And then I move to the computers, and I compare their computers to my computer. And then I kind of move to the dishes and the blenders and the vacuum cleaners, and I compare those to ours. And as I walk up and down those aisles, my head begins to spin, and my eyes, I think, begin to have this crazed look, because everything I look at, I think I need that. I mean, I need it, I want it, it's something I should have, and I really start needing and wanting it, and I think my thinking gets distorted because I end up comparing what is there in the store to what I have at home, and I get distorted, and so I start wanting things, kind of like one of the things I wanted and needed was this. This is a Craftsman Toolbox, and this is my toolbox, and for years, I'd walked up and down the aisles of Costco dreaming about owning this particular Craftsman Toolbox. And because my old toolbox, I mean, it was just kind of this gray plastic thing that sat on a shelf, but this is a real toolbox. I mean, this is the real thing. Even from the time I was a kid, I can remember going to Moss and Blair's mobile station as a kid, and they had one of these, and I thought, that is a toolbox. And so every time I would go to Costco, I would look at this toolbox and I would just compare it to my toolbox. And I must have drooled over it long enough that about 4 or 5 years ago, Ruth actually surprised me one Christmas morning, and she gave me this toolbox. And I love this toolbox, and I love the way it looks in my garage. I mean, I just think it looks good sitting in our garage. But here's the thing. I don't have any tools. I mean, I don't use tools. I'm not even allowed to use tools in my house because I tend to break things and damage things. And so Ruth is the one that uses tools at our house. And so when she gave me this new toolbox, I had nothing to put in it. But I like it still. I mean, it's nice and it looks good in my garage. And so the next Christmas, Ruth actually bought me some tools, and they came in this plastic case, and there were wrenches and screwdrivers, and I mean, I don't even know what else was in it. And so I unwrapped this amazing tool kit that Christmas morning, but then I didn't know what to do with them. And so if you were to come to my toolbox and open the top drawer, you would find all of my tools still in that plastic case right there, ready for somebody to use, but it's not going to be me because I'm not allowed to use tools. And I kind of go, what was I thinking? I mean, why would I want a Craftsman red toolbox with all these shelves? I don't even have tools. I don't even know how to use tools. I'm not allowed to use them. And I'd been walking up and down those aisles comparing what I had to what was there. And my thinking became distorted. And there's one other thing I want you to see in this picture. If you look close over here on this shelf, you know what that is? That's a chainsaw. I bought that myself at Costco, a chainsaw. Ruth knew better than to buy me a chainsaw. I can't use a chainsaw. I mean, I'm not allowed to use tools, but it's there and it looks good on my shelf, and my garage is full of things that I can't use. And yet, you go, why? Well, I guess because I go to Costco and I compare, and when I compare, my thinking gets all distorted, and I end up with things like a big, giant, red, empty Craftsman toolbox. I end up with a chainsaw that I can't use, and if we're honest, some of you have some shiny toolboxes you don't use either, that you don't even need, like me, but for some of you, it's a lot bigger than a red Craftsman toolbox, and now you're in debt because of your comparisons, and you purchase things, you've driven things, you're living in things, you're wearing things, you've eaten things, you're vacationing places, and you've done things, and the only reason that you have those things or you've done those things is because you started comparing, and like me, as you compared, your thinking got all distorted and your eyes glazed over, and you thought, you know what, I've got to have these, everybody else has one of those, and now all of a sudden you're in debt, and it's dangerous. Comparisons get us into trouble. Some of you, it's not even about having things. Some of you, it's just what you want out of your family, and you're driving your spouse crazy, you're driving your kids crazy, and you don't buy red toolboxes. Instead, you just keep pushing your spouse, or you keep pushing your kids, and you keep pushing them to do better. You want the in their lives, and a little bit more, and be like the kids down the street and accomplish what they're doing, or be like the husband across the street, or the wife one house over. You just keep pushing and pushing, and your thinking has gotten all distorted, and you justify your pushing by telling everyone, you know what, I'm just helping them reach their full potential. That's all I'm doing. And when you know it's not even about them. It's all about you and what other people are going to think about you, and it's dangerous because if you're not careful, you're going to push and you're going to push and you're going to push. At some point, you're going to drive them away altogether, and comparisons are dangerous. And maybe you've experienced some of that yourself. I mean, maybe you've been on the other side of it where you were pushed as a kid, and the words that your father used are still ringing in your ears when he said to you, why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you be more like your sister? She never had any problems like this. And comparisons can be dangerous because they'll tear your family apart. Now, not only do comparisons distort our thinking, they get us into trouble, comparisons also make us prideful. We begin to look to the left and the right, and we kind of go, I think I'm better than some of the other people, and all of a sudden we become prideful. Look at Luke chapter 18. It's page 800. Luke chapter 18. Page 800 in the Bibles there at your seats. I want you to read about a guy that kind of does what we so often do. He looked to his left, he looked to his right, he found somebody that was worse off than him, and he's real prideful about it. Luke chapter 18, let me begin reading verse 9, page 800. This is a story that Jesus told. Then Jesus told this story to some who had great confidence in their own righteousness and scorned everyone else. In other words, Jesus told this story to people that he knew were already comparing, already knew that they were prideful. 2 men went to the temple to pray, Jesus said. One was a Pharisee, the other was a despised tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer, thank you, God, that I'm not a sinner like everyone else, for I don't cheat, I don't sin, I don't commit adultery. I'm certainly not like that tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give you 1/10 of my income. This guy's looked over to his left and he's seen the tax collector. He says, thank goodness I'm not like that guy. And all of a sudden he becomes real proud of that. Verse 13, but the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, oh God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner. He doesn't fall into the comparison thing, or if he does, he just knows, man, it's not even worth it. I am so much worse than the others. And Jesus says, verse 14, I'll tell you this, sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And Jesus just says, be really careful. It's dangerous to start comparing, and it's dangerous to compare yourself to others and somehow think that you are better and become prideful. He says, don't let your comparisons bring you down because it will hurt you. I like what C.S. Lewis actually had to say about this. C.S. Lewis said, we say that people are proud of being rich or clever or good looking, but they're not. They're proud of being richer or cleverer or better looking than others. It's the fact that they're more than other people. That's what they're proud of. If everyone else became equally rich or clever or good looking, there would be nothing to be proud of. And he says when we get prideful, it's just because we're a little bit, in our minds at least, a step above everybody else. And be careful. Comparisons, there's no win in comparison, and it can lead us to become prideful. One other reason comparisons are dangerous. Not only do they distort our thinking, not only do they cause us to be prideful, but comparisons as well can make us resentful. History tells us about a king named Saul who had a young recruit named David in his army. David was great. Go back to 1 Samuel chapter 18. It's page 225. So back where you were a few moments ago, but this time chapter 18. 1 Samuel chapter 18, page 225 in the Bibles there at your seats. And we see this exchange between Saul and David, and just what happens when all of a sudden you start comparing and resentfulness can set in. Let me begin reading verse 5 of 1 Samuel chapter 18. Whatever Saul asked David to do, David did it successfully. So it describes David, this great guy. So Saul made him commander over the men of war and appointed an appointment that was welcomed by the people and Saul's officers alike. When the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the Philistine, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul. So David goes off, he fights the battle, he wins. Everybody comes out to celebrate with King Saul. Then they did this. They sang and they danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals. This was their song. Saul has killed his thousands, which that felt good to Saul, but then they added, and David his 10,000s. This made Saul very angry. What's this? He said they credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king. So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. From that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. His comparisons caused him to be resentful. And I think we can spend a lot of time keeping a jealous eye on people too. We don't do it in the streets with people singing and tambourines, and it tends to happen on Facebook, looking at the post of others, and we'll never admit we're jealous of what they're posting, and instead we just say to ourselves things like, must be nice. Must be nice to have that kind of time. Must be nice to have that kind of money. Must be nice to live that kind of charmed life. And we might throw in a few bless your hearts, and it just kind of comparisons, making us resentful. And a study that was actually published by the Psychology, Behavior, and Social Networking Journal said this. They found that Facebook was associated with lower self-esteem, poor mental health, and greater body shame. They're saying what happens on Facebook is everybody's comparing themselves, and it actually is driving people down. In fact, those that quit Facebook immediately experienced a boost in life satisfaction and positive emotions. In other words, they're saying there is so much going on, comparison going on with Facebook, keeping that jealous eye on everybody else on Facebook, that it's actually damaging people. It's dangerous. University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine actually did a study as well. This is what they found. They found exposure to highly idealized representations of peers' lives on social media sites may elicit feelings of envy and the distorted belief that others lead happier and more successful lives. We go, really? You mean what they're saying is not everything is true on Facebook? And yet we look at that and we compare ourselves, and it says it elicits feelings of envy because we look and we go, well, I could never be like that. I could never experience what they're experiencing. I could never have a family like that. I could never have a marriage like that. I could never drive a car like that. I could never live in a place like that. I could never take that kind of vacation. And we get caught comparing ourselves to others, and all of a sudden we get resentful. And you know what oftentimes happens? Some of us get resentful. Others, you look in the mirror and you don't get upset with everybody else for the fantasy lives they're living on Facebook. Instead, you just get mad at yourself, and you look in the mirror and you hate yourself. And you go, you know what, I'll never measure up to these people. I'll never be that happy. I'll never have that kind of job. I'll never drive that kind of car. I'll never have kids that are as successful as theirs. And you don't get upset with them about it. You just hate yourself for it. And here's the sad thing. Because we spend so much time comparing ourselves to others, what we end up doing, we resent God's goodness in the lives of others, and then we ignore what God is doing in our own lives and the goodness that he's bringing about in our own lives. And so I guess I would ask you, how many good things are you missing out on right now in your life, because you're so focused on the things that other people have that you don't? How many good things are you missing out right now because, like me, you find yourself at times walking up down the aisles of Costco thinking, if I only had that, life would be good. And how many things or how many good people are you resenting because of your comparisons? And there's no win in comparison. Not only that, it's just dangerous. There's nothing good that comes out of comparison. It's only pride, it's only sadness, but nothing good comes out of it. So you say, so how do we move beyond comparisons? If it's not a good thing, but we just have this tendency to constantly look left, constantly look right, but if we want to experience life the way God intends us to experience it, if we want to experience a remarkable life, how in the world are we supposed to get past making comparisons? And it's really pretty simple. It's harder to do than it is to describe, but to get beyond making comparisons, bottom line, know who you are. Don't worry about who everybody else is. Know who you are. And you can spend all your time worrying about what other people think about you, or you can step back and you can say, you know what, who am I really? And God is more than happy to tell you who you are. Let me just tell you a couple things that God says about you. Ephesians chapter 2, God says, we're his masterpiece. You are his masterpiece. He's created you anew in Christ Jesus so that you can do all the good things that he planned for you long ago. You are God's masterpiece. You're not a mistake. You're not a mess. You're his masterpiece. He designed you, made you the way he wanted you to be. Psalm 139 describes it this way. You, God, made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Thank you, God, for making me the way that I am, is what the psalmist is writing. Your workmanship, God, is marvelous. How well I know it. You washed me as I was formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. And the same God that created the universe, the same God that created the skies and the seas and the land and everything in it and on it with all of its beauty, God says, you're my masterpiece. Those other things, they're great, but you're my masterpiece, and I've made you exactly the way I want you to be. Know who you are. You are who God wanted you to be. And C.S. Lewis considered a man by the name of George MacDonald to be his mentor in life. And this is what George MacDonald said. He said, I would rather be what God chose to make me than the most glorious creature that I could think of. I would rather be who God wants me to be, who he designed me to be, than to be some creature that I just think up in my head. He said, for to have been thought about and born in God's thought, the idea that somehow God thought about you and then he created you and then made by God is the dearest, grandest, and most precious thing in all thinking. The idea that God thought about you exactly as you are. And then he designed you and he made you the way that you are. He says there's nothing more amazing to think of. And do you know that you are loved by God? Do you know that he designed you to be just the way that you are? Do you know that you are incredibly valuable to God, no matter what other people may have, no matter what other people may do, no matter what other people may even think about you? Do you know that you are incredibly valuable to God? And stop comparing yourself to others. There's no win in comparison. It's dangerous. Stop worrying about what other people think about you. I like what Eleanor Roosevelt actually said about thinking about what others think. She said, you wouldn't worry so much about what others think if you actually realized how seldom they do think about you. You have this idea and you're living your life based on what you think other people are going to think, when she says, you know what, they're not even thinking about you anyway. But you know what I would tell you? I think that's true. Most people don't think about other people most of the time. But can I tell you, God thinks about you all the time. God thought about you before he created you. God thought about you as you were being created in the womb. God thinks enough about you that he actually knows how many hairs are on your head or how many they're not on your head. Or he thinks enough about you that he sent Jesus into the world to save you from all of your messes and your junk. And God thinks enough about you that he actually invites you to be his son or his daughter. And so, can I just ask you, why do you expend so much time and energy comparing yourself to others? Why do you expend so much time and energy comparing what you have to what others have or don't have? Why do you spend so much time and energy worried about what other people think? Why not just listen to what God actually has to say about you? The fact that he says, you know what, I love you. And I've made you and designed you to be who you are and what you are today. Oh, Heavenly Father, I ask, God, that somehow we would come to the point of realizing it's not about comparing ourselves to others. There's no win in that. There's nothing positive that's going to come out of that. God, I ask that you would keep us from being resentful. God, I ask that you'd keep us from being prideful. God, I ask that you'd keep our heads clear, that we wouldn't become distorted in our thinking, all because of the the comparing that we're doing ourselves to others. And so, Father, help us see things clearly. Help us see ourselves the way you see us. May we begin to realize how important we are to you. God, I ask that our lives would be different. I ask that we would be able to live remarkable lives as we listen to what you say about us and not what others say about us. And I pray in Jesus' name, amen.